Amy Chandler, it is so good to see you, my friend. This is a really humbling and sort of full circle experience for me. Amy has been my therapist for, gosh, over 15 years. Both my husband and I have seen her. Amy has worked in therapy for over 30 years, worked with a number of clients, a number of couples, a number of families. And I have so much respect for you, Amy, not only as a therapist, but as a person. And I invited Amy today to be on the Hot Flash Health podcast because there's so much of what you've taught me and what you have built fundamentally within your practice that applies to what we're talking about. So thank you, first and foremost, for being here. You mean the world to me, and it's really exciting to be able to talk to you.
Cool. I'm happy to be here. This is exciting.
Well, amongst being an incredible therapist and having a very, very different approach, Amy is also the mother of three beautiful and extremely intelligent boys. I know that you've had a lot of experience in facilitating love and logic classes, which we'll talk about that more so because you've certainly helped in my journey with my children. And you've used a lot of your life experiences with your own depression, your own childhood trauma, your own addiction, abuse, divorce, really to the practicalities of how you approach your clients. So tell us a little bit about your practice, your approach, and what you're seeing when people come to you.
Perfect. So I really kind of started out in the addiction field. I worked probably 15 years with domestic violence, both women and men. I went through a lot of my own therapy and my own stuff in my 20s. And all of those things combined, working in the court order field, seeing how addiction and families and all those things kind of came together, I've come up with a system that gets people out of their patterns. I went to therapy. I had an amazing therapist. I also think that a lot of my therapy eventually started attaching me to the trauma instead of detaching me from the trauma or traumas, or made traumas that weren't traumas. Made it a lot more crisisy than it actually was. Got me stuck.
You know,
And
you've said in a lot of our experience over the years that you have not necessarily believed all the time in traditional therapy. And certainly, when I'm sitting on your couch, you have a very, very different approach, which I can only imagine is an acquired taste for some. It works for some and it doesn't work for other. But I have really respected, and frankly, your approach works. It is very in your face. It is very direct communication. Get your shit together, and you hold people accountable. It has been so effective because unlike other therapy sessions, you know, where you're going once a week and how does this make you feel and blah, 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 and all the bullshit, you dig deep and you go fast and you're effective. In your experience, talk about how you approach therapy in terms of people coming to you and really being in that victim cycle and switching them over to the accountability cycle, because that is something, Amy, that's been life changing for me. I can't tell you how many people I've shared this with, but literally it has overlap in every single area of your life. So can you talk about that a little bit, because it is so
yeah.
effective?
Well, what I started noticing is that really what people do is they come to therapy to talk about how they're the victim of something, victim of their past, victim of their partner, victim of their husband, their wife, their job, their boss. Even when you're just working with one person, people tend to come to therapy to talk about how they feel victimized, which makes sense. And I think because I worked in domestic violence, I was like, well, you're accountable for what you're accountable for. You can't keep on justifying shitty behavior as an adult because there's no justification for it. Eventually, you have to own that you're participating in your own cycle, and you have been victimized. I've been victimized. And I also participated in either getting stuck in it or learning how to manipulate that. People have been victimized. I've been horribly victimized. And I still have a responsibility for how I was in the situation, how I reacted to the situation, what I do with the situation today. Like, trauma doesn't have a timeline, so it feels like trauma happened yesterday and it happened 50 years ago. And it can feel like it's happening right now, like it happened yesterday. And I compassion and empathy for that. And if it's I'm being held hostage by something that happened to me 50 years ago, there's some part of my story that I've got to shift and change so that I can get out of the pattern and release and not be hostage to something that I didn't actually do. Right? I really shift people from being the victim to accountability, and I watch people's lives change in a week. I know that's for your behavior. Like, you can't just keep acting out and act like that you are justified in doing that. You have to kind of see why you're doing that and whether or not you want to change it.
I was very fortunate, both my husband and I, to take one of Amy's 6-week classes, boot camps, that we're going to talk about a little bit later. But just understanding that victim cycle and really those learned behaviors that stem from childhood trauma, pointing that out and acknowledging it, and of learning that accountability cycle has completely shifted my thought process in so many things in my life. I feel like I have this tattooed on my ass, but will you share the victim cycle and accountability cycle in sort of a high level overview?
People say they're triggered all the time, but actually people can't tell me what's actually been triggered. Clients, people, individuals don't actually know what got triggered. And so you get triggered basically by some event. You then start telling yourself a story that you've been telling yourself your whole life. Like, it's a very attached story. No one listens to me. Everyone's this, here we go again. I'm not good enough. No one cares. Like, you have a victim story. You have a downloaded default story that sort of just instantly plays, which then gives you permission and justification for, then I call it a temper tantrum, to like either freeze or shut down or go into depression or get anxiety or hit somebody or drink more alcohol, anything you do that sabotages you. So you get triggered, you tell yourself a story, and now you have justification for really just sort of fucking losing it, right? At the end of the day. And then you have a hangover from doing that because you have to recover from that. Sometimes you apologize, sometimes you're just trying to recover. You get triggered, you tell yourself a story, you go into a temper tantrum, which, it's actually a trauma response, but people don't understand that. And then people go to therapy to talk about all those behaviors, the drinking, the drugs, the marriage, the communication, I don't like my body, I don't like this is the problem. And eventually I was like, it's just a waste of time to talk about that because you actually have a belief system that supports it. So if you don't understand your belief system that's been downloaded in the first place and you're functioning from a place that doesn't serve you, talking about you go to therapy and spend years talking about the behaviors instead of talking about the beliefs that you need to actually detach from.
It's interesting, and being vulnerable and speaking from my personal experience, Amy really taught me that as a 46-year-old woman, I was downloaded a core belief system in my life, learned from behaviors and patterns and things of that nature from my parents. And whether it was healthy or not, that core belief system that I sat in was where I felt safe. Anytime my core belief system was challenged, in this case, my husband showing up for me, right, which challenged my core belief system, that really triggered me. And
because you believed men wouldn't show up for you, and that's what you needed to happen.
That's correct. And so with that being said, I was then triggered, which puts my husband in a very difficult situation because he's showing up for our family and for me, trying to be supportive. But I didn't know what to do with that. I didn't feel safe because that didn't meet my core belief system. So once I'm triggered, then of course I go into the cycle, which for me personally is very much anxiety and not being able to control that situation. So catastrophization, anxiety, and then I have the hangover, which in a lot of cases is retreating or not speaking. So it's a really, really interesting cycle. And I asked you at one point in time, I'll never forget, I was sitting in your chair and I said, you're fucking crazy, woman. How in God's green earth do you want me to literally change my core belief system that that is the only thing that I have known and felt safe in for 46 years? And your answer to me was, I just need to teach you the accountability cycle versus the victim cycle and the story that you've been telling yourself for 46 years. And once I'm able to do that, then you can start to sort of translate that accountability cycle in your life. And that was very, very, very powerful for me. You're quick, you're witty, you're in your face, and you are very, very open and willing to call someone out on their bullshit. And I think that a lot of therapists do not do that, for better or for worse. But for a lot of people, including myself and my husband and the tens and 15 and 20 people that I've sent you, they're like, holy shit, I've been going to therapy for 10 years. I learned more in this than I've learned in 10 years in one session. So I really, really appreciate your approach in speaking about the core belief system and how your core belief system that you've been downloaded in your life shows up everywhere. And oftentimes it relates to childhood trauma. Now, as we explore of hot flash health and a lot of our topics around menopause and hormonal health, you also do a really great job of sort of recognizing and identifying what women are going through in their middle age, because there's so much childhood trauma that presents itself in middle age, and there's so many areas of your life that it's impacted. Talk to me a little bit about sort of those life shifts and how with your clients and me and things like that, you're seeing our middle age life shifting as it pertains to, you know, sexuality or your sex drive or your relationship or your friendships or your identity.
There's a lot of things going on between, like, let's say 45 and up. I'm about to turn 59. And so what's going on for me at 59 is not the same thing that's going on for someone that's 45. So there's a lot of shifting and changing. I think in my practice, I see a lot of marriages coming in because in conflict, in crisis, because the expectation of marriage that they downloaded, it's kind of bullshit. It's not actually what marriage looks like. It's not what motherhood looked like. It's not what you thought it was going to look like. I think there's a lot of things happening. You're starting to see your kids grow up and leave home. You're dealing with elderly parents. You're dealing with your marriage because your marriage has been on the back burner since you had kids. Generally, it's not really the priority. The kids' needs become the priority. So the marriage gets really lost. I think women get really lost in being mothers. Women get really lost in who they are. And so I think there's a lot of shifts from kids growing up and not needing the same things. It's the same for women. You grow up and you don't need the same things, and really trying to identify what that is and what those shifts are and trying to communicate those and figure that out for yourself sexually, emotionally, spiritually, in your marriage, for yourself. Like, all of that is changing. It's like a renegotiation of your contract with yourself. And it's unsettling because there's a lot of loss. There's potentially a lot of conflict because you wake up and you're like, this isn't what I wanted or needed. Your body is changing, your sex life. But I will tell you, I think it still comes down to sort of what you were downloaded about getting older, about marriage, about kids, about your body, about menopause, about sex. Like, all those things creep up. I can't do a session without somebody's actual download, conscious and unconscious. You have to like spend some time figuring out what you actually believed about what your world was going to look like. Mentally, there's a lot of loss. There's potentially depression. There's a shift. There's anxiety. I mean, just, you know, if you have a diagnosis, I think that gets kicked up for different reasons because it's getting triggered over and over and over. And you don't have control. So your sense of control is different. Your identity is starting to change because you're not just a mother anymore. You're not just a wife anymore, or you never got married and had kids. And now you're looking at, you know, there's all kinds of things depending on everyone's situation that you're really facing. I think we're triggered on a regular basis and really don't know what to do with it.
That's why you're so valuable. And speaking of middle age, you've done a really great job of teaching me, and frankly, my husband as well, how to set boundaries. And oftentimes, as I'm having these conversations with so many girlfriends, they're really having this awakening in their own lives of wanting to invest in themselves and wanting to take care of themselves and dig deep into some of these wounds. And in doing so, that requires setting boundaries, which is a very difficult thing. And I know from my experience, setting boundaries has caused conflict in my marriage, has caused conflict in friendships, has caused conflict in relationships. You talk a lot about setting boundaries and how to protect yourself versus the demands that you're placing on others.
As soon as you said that, I was like, okay, be quiet. I have like a whole lot to say. Enough time.
It's not the first time you've told me to be quiet, by the way. It's usually shut the fuck up. Like, I need to say something.
I don't love to use boundaries. I think it's an overused word and it's lost a lot of its meaning. People need to look at boundaries are how you protect and respect yourself. Boundaries are your contract with yourself. They have nothing to do with other people. You are only upset because somebody crossed your contract. But then we blame them for crossing the contract. So if you are not protecting and respecting yourself, the only person who crossed your boundaries is you. It's not other people. It's literally sitting down and going, well, what is my contract with myself emotionally? It's your agreement. It's how you protect and respect yourself. That's what a contract is. Well, it should be. So how do I emotionally, physically, sexually, socially, in my marriage, with myself, figure out who I am, first of all, what I need, do my own words and behavior match up? Because if they don't, you are out of line, not other people. You either respect or you disrespect yourself. And when you don't sit down and actually figure out what that means, then you really are kind of floating out there mad that everyone's crossing your boundaries. No one's crossing your boundaries. You don't
and
even
then you
know.
fall into that victim cycle, right? It's back.
You're in the victim cycle. Because somebody did something to you. I'm like, well, no, you are not protecting and respecting yourself, which means you have to get out of that cycle and actually advocate for yourself. And you have to be okay with or without whatever the fallout is. Like, I have a non-negotiable, then it's my non-negotiable to follow. It's not yours. You don't have to agree to my non-negotiables. You don't have to agree to my boundaries. I have to agree to my boundaries. You don't. It's pro me, not anti you. And I think there is loss and there's definitely shifting when people start to get more of an advocate for themselves or their family or their marriage. Like, this is what we do to protect and respect ourselves. You already know this, but I raised my kids with attitude, gratitude, respect, and no secrets. That was the rule. That was it. And if you want to disrespect yourself, I'll stand aside, but you need to understand and take responsibility for respecting yourself. And I'm not picking up the pieces. Those are your choices to make. And it applies to me too. If I want to go disrespect myself, that's fine, but I can't whine about the consequences of what I'm doing. I don't even have an agenda about people getting so accountable. I just have an agenda about actually knowing what you're choosing, consciously accepting that you're doing it, and be okay with the benefits and the consequences of what you're doing, and stop complaining ultimately that somebody else is doing something to you, because you're really participating in it. You don't really have to, in everything I've learned and everything that I've been teaching, there are probably 90% of the stuff I would have had conversations with before are unnecessary. It is really just me getting back in line with myself. And that usually just takes care of whatever the situation is. And there's not a lot I have to do or say to people other than keep my own shit together.
Are certainly constant in our household that you've taught us. You talked about attitude, gratitude, respect, and no secrets, which has been something that we have instilled in our children, and I'm thankful for that lesson. So thank you. You talked earlier about 90% of what you think needs to be said doesn't need to be said, and you have taught both my husband and I, when you're trying to communicate something, really say what you are intending to say in 8 words or less. Talk talk to me about why that has been so fundamental in your practice and how that helps people. I can speak from my experience, but
I think if you can't say it in 8 words or less, this is my speech. If you can't say it in 8 words or less, you don't know what you need because you don't have clarity. And if you can't say it in 8 words or less, you actually don't know what you did to somebody. So I could spend weeks in my head having a temper tantrum or calling friends and complaining. And I guess I process like that. I process out loud and I cuss and scream and kick and scream in my own way, right? But that process should get you to some clarity eventually. And in that clarity, you should be able to say it in 8 words or less. So I need a hug is not a 4-hour conversation. And I don't need to manipulate you to give me a hug. I need to start asking for a hug. I need to say I need space. I actually am responsible to know what I need, ask for what I need, and then get what I need. And so if I can't figure out what I need, I can't be mad because no one else is meeting my expectations. So that's another like big sort of ripoff because no one else is responsible. No one's coming. Like you have to figure out your own. That's another one of my things. Like no one's coming. You have to figure out your own shit and then you're responsible for it. And then you have to say it. And then you have to live your life by it. Your words and behavior need to match up. And, I've joked because, I've been out of a relationship. I'd like to be in a relationship. And those are my words. My behavior would tell you and anybody else she has no intention of ever getting into another fucking relationship. Like, I don't date. If I wanted a boyfriend, I'd have a boyfriend. There's a way to do that. There's a behavior that does that. My behavior doesn't leave room for it.
So that's the next Amyism that I've learned is your comparison to relationships or conflict in a sandbox. Tell everyone about this sandbox behavior because it's so simple.
So the victim and the bully are the same people sitting in a sandbox. Ultimately, you can't have a victim without a bully. It's a very codependent relationship. It doesn't exist unless both people participate, basically. And I think the big lie that people think is you're one or the other. You're actually both. I am a perpetrator and I'm a victim. I have my own shit and I've been victimized. Both are true. And in a marriage, in conflict, you bounce between the two of them. You're not just a victim and you're not just a bully. You actually participate in both. So you're sitting in the same sandbox and literally arguing over who threw the sand first. With not understanding that you can get up and leave the sandbox. You can just leave the sandbox and then there's no more conflict. And if you're in the sandbox, it's not going to ever get resolved because there's no accountability. It's the victim's fault or it's the bully's fault. There's no ownership in it. So you have to own your behavior to get out of the sandbox. You have to own that you are also, it's really funny because every couple comes in and tells me how much they're doing. And I do everything. I'm like, well, if you're both doing everything, I'm not sure why you're sitting here. And there's no compassion or empathy for like, we're all just doing a lot. It's just a scorekeeping problem. So that's sitting in the sandbox, having temper tantrums, fighting about why you're in the sandbox or that you are you're trying to prove you're in the sandbox. And I'm like, need to go to the swings and play. And if someone wants to come over there and hang out, that's great. But you are responsible for being in the sandbox when you're in it, and you're responsible to get yourself out of the sandbox. Because really, Dawn, nobody's coming. No one can do your work for you. And no one's required to do your work for you. And I think in marriages, I think in our life, we're sort of taught that somebody else is going to like fix that wound or help us out. And they're not obligated to do it. I can't make you happy.
I'll never forget a conversation that we were having. We're in the process, as many people know, and certainly of building a home, and the home hasn't been completed on time. And my poor husband is the contractor, and so I placed a lot of blame on him that the home wasn't done. And you were so quick in the most kind, direct way to hold me accountable and say, you know, Dawn, you have a part in this too. Why do you feel entitled? And I do believe you called me entitled, which admittedly I was and can be. You are entitled in that you feel like this home should be built within a certain period of time for you. The reason I bring that up is you're right. You have to look in the mirror, have those hard conversations with yourself, and really take a look at your contributions. And for that, I'm really grateful for you. And it's so effective. I can't tell you how many people I'm literally sitting in a bar with on a napkin drawing. But moving on, I want to talk about a couple other things that have been so valuable to me and I think would be very valuable to the Hot Flash Health audience. You have a lot of experience in love and logic, and you have raised these three beautiful boys as a single mother. And I'm constantly in awe of what you share with me about your family and how independent they are and how grounded they are. You talked a lot about in my sessions in boot camp with you that each one of us take on a archetype, I believe is what it's called. And you
Mm-hmm.
shared with me um, several archetypes that our children are actually taking on as a result of our behavior and what they're being downloaded. That was very powerful for me because having three children, I recognize that each one of them are very different. And it was very clear to me as to each one of those archetypes or behaviors or personas that they are taking on. And I have no doubt that part of that is as a result of what both my husband and I are downloading in their lives. So can you talk about your approach to raising children, some of the love and logic and the archetypes and personas that our children are taking on?
Sure. So the archetypes aren't mine. Like I didn't create the scapegoat, the perfectionist, the mascot, the lost child, the pleaser. So it's a dysfunctional family, and we all have bits and parts of all of them. I have it. I love my scapegoat. I wish I had more perfectionist in me. I vacillate between a lost child and a scapegoat. I can see. So what they are really your coping skills to deal with conflict. They are the positive and negative, but there are negative coping skills that you develop to deal with what is or isn't happening in your home when you're growing up. So um, it's how you react to conflict at the end of the day. It's how you deal with anxiety. So a lost child shuts down and goes in the back room and closes the door. Scapegoat, the more you try to control a scapegoat, the more the scapegoat tells you to fuck off and they go do what they're going to go do. It's a battle for control in the house, really. A perfectionist just does more B's, straight A's, joins everything. And I love perfectionists. Perfectionists can only be bad secretly. So they have like a secret scapegoat, a secret fuck you, but they show up, man, and they look good and right and in order and their house is good. And that's all not true. Everyone's got struggles. Everyone's, all over the place. The pleaser is somebody who they don't really know how to say no. They will sort of compromise themselves at their expense to make you happy. So they're all really codependent. They're all sitting in the sandbox. They have positive characteristics too, but the negative ones are what sends you into counseling. The negative ones sabotage you. And so really what I've learned how to do, maybe out of my own frustration, is just let me tell you the information. Let me explain family dynamics to you. Let me explain where your trauma is coming from. Let me explain that this is your shit. Like, let's get there, because you can't come to therapy to fix what somebody else did to you. You can only come to therapy to deal with how you're going to react to what's happened to you. I'm big on love and logic, because what love and logic does is undo codependency. It doesn't teach you codependency. Like, your parenting is not coming from a codependent place. I don't know what my kids need to wear for the day. I know what I need to know I know what I need to wear that day. So it was like sending them outside to do a weather check to figure out what they needed for the day. So they're figuring out. Love and Logic teaches you everything I'm trying to teach adults in therapy. Like, I don't know what you need. You have to figure out what you need. I'm sorry you did that to yourself. There's consequences. You want to be married or divorced? Do you want the blue coat or red coat? Like, do you want to be married or divorced? Because there's a way to be married and there's a way to be divorced. And lots of people are working harder on a divorce saying they want to be married than actually working on a marriage trying to be married. So,
Isn't that crazy? I mean, gosh.
oh, I don't want to be depressed anymore. Okay, well, what do you want to be? Like, what is it? It's a different way. There's different thinking. There's different, and I want to be real clear. I believe in mental health. I believe in diagnoses. I believe in anxiety. I believe in depression. I also believe they can also be used as your new identity. And I don't think that's healthy. I think they become people's biggest excuse when they're not actually addressing their depression, anxiety, or mental health issues. Like, it can't just be your go to, it can't be your anchor in your life. No one's coming. You still have to get up and function in your life the best way you can.
As a middle-aged woman and having conversations with so many of my friends, and I'm shifting gears a bit, we find ourselves in this sandwich generation, right? Between our children, and aging parents, where we're taking care of both of them, or in some cases, our children are leaving the household and we're struggling with identities as human beings or as mothers because we don't have that anymore. I can only imagine you're seeing a lot of women and men, of course, who are going through that.
So I'm old I mean, I have a 16-year-old who's leaving home quicker. My youngest is 16. He's leaving home much faster than the other two did. And so I'm bracing myself, right? And I'm catching myself going into a lot of like, did I teach him everything? Oh my God, like I screwed up all this stuff. What if this happens? And what's our relationship going to look like longer, later? And and a warning to them, your wives will not replace me. Like, you will have a life with me with like, whether we like the in-laws or not. Like a lot of fear is actually coming up. It's my job to figure out my identity outside of my kids. It's my job to figure out my entertainment outside of my children.
Might have to find a boyfriend.
Might have to find a boyfriend.
We could use this as a shameless plug. Beautiful, smart, funny,
You know,
no bullshit.
no bullshit, right? And you need a retirement plan. Got to have some security. Um, like, just struggling with my own, like, going into my own cycle about what a failure I've been as a mom. And if you look at my kids, nobody would say, "Oh, she really fucked this up." Nobody would say that. They're very. I feel like I underparented and I used a lot of love and logic. And I don't even know if my kids would say that I underparented. But I will tell you, underparenting and overparenting will both cause problems for your kids. It's just acknowledging and listening to my own thinking and realizing I'm in my own self-loathing and my own self-doubt and my own, fears around what this looks like next. Like, and I was not prepared for my 16-year-old to leave home as quick as he's leaving home. And I mean, emotionally, physically, like
Mm-hmm.
he's going fast.
Yeah.
So that's not what your only identity is. And your
Yeah.
marriage isn't either, by the way. Like, you are your identity. And so who do you really want to be? I also think there's a lot of shifting into realizing who you thought you were versus who you think you might be today. And some of
Mm-hmm.
the lies you might have been telling yourself for a long time, and realizing, oh, I don't even really like this or that, or I really do want to do this. And I never thought I would do that. So I think there's a renegotiation of what your life is going to look like. And I think it gets kicked up because of menopause, gets kicked up because you're getting older, gets kicked up because things are changing.
Yeah. So you've shifted your practice a little bit to a really interesting and powerful model, and one that I've taken advantage of, and I know many of my friends have taken advantage of, that's very effective. Can you share what you are doing now, your approach to things, and sort of give an umbrella pitch, if you will, of where you're shifting?
So it's a company called Just Amy, and it has there's a book in the works, but it's not quite there yet. But I've got a workbook, and it's a class right now. It's a 6 week class. We're actually going to try to do it in a 2 day class, a full like weekend, and just like really sock it to people in 2 days.
But you better brace yourself. You're going to learn more in that 2 days than you might have learned your entire life.
Yeah. It's a 6 week class that sort of teaches you the cycle and then dives deep into the cycle so you can work out some of your own stuff. 18 hour, it's a 3 hour a night class for 6 weeks.
So if someone signs up for a 6 week course, and I know this because I've done it, and it is very effective, what do they expect? What can they get from this course?
Well, they will get feedback. If I maybe all therapists are, but I'm really fast to figure it out, and I'll tell you really quickly what I see. I'll tell you what to look at. I'll tell you where I think you're really out of line with yourself. I'll tell you where your words and behavior don't match up at all. I'll call you out. You will have a system that works with or without a therapist. You'll have a tool and a book, but you'll have an actual tool, the cycle I was talking about, that you can process on your own, and it doesn't, every time I get triggered, I use it. It takes like 30 seconds after you practice it for a minute, or you're having a temper tantrum and you need to figure yourself out. I think the thing that happens is once people recognize that their own behavior is destructive and their temper tantrums are not justified, pretty much the first week people stop having their temper tantrums, or at least recognize them quicker and pull back. So that's a huge shift. That takes years in therapy for someone to be like, oh, I stopped acting like that. I'm like, well, so that happens probably the first week. You will also notice everybody else's temper tantrums, and you learn how to get out of them and not take them personally.
You identify what your core belief system is and what you've been downloaded your entire life, which is very powerful. Your approach from understanding the core belief system, your victim cycle, and recognizing what that is, and then teaching the accountability cycle applies to all aspects of your life. It applies to relationships, it applies to marriages, it applies to family dynamics, it applies to parenting, it applies to friendships, it applies to professional life. Really, I have fundamentally used what you have taught me in every area of my life.
I want to, compliment you and also talk about, the menopause, and um, it also has a lot to do with how you're going to face aging, how you're going to deal with menopause, how you're going to deal with the shifts and changes in your life. Like it's also a topic because we have downloaded whatever our mothers taught us or our friends are saying that may or may not be true for you, like may or may not be your experience. And so how do I really want to be in charge of this instead of it's the end of my life? It's the beginning of something. Like, what do you want to attach to? What do you need to detach from while all these things are happening in your life and changing in your life, and what all that means emotionally, physically, spiritually, sexually, socially. But that's consciously thinking about those things and diving in and taking a look, and like you can't just well you can just sort of blindly go through it, but you'll be frustrated, you'll be in a lot of resentment when you do that. Like, you can only heal things from accountability. You cannot heal anything from being the victim.
And that's really what we're all about at Hot Flash Health, is recognizing that 100% of women are going to go through menopause, whether they struggle with symptomatically what menopause brings, or how their lives might be disrupted in terms of the 5 pillars: mentally, spiritually, physically, hormonally, sexually. But really, at Hot Flash Health, we're here to empower women to embrace their sort of inner queenager, do the work to understand and to own it, invest in their health, invest in their mental health, and be vulnerable, transparent, and share with others what they're going through. Because for so long, it's been a very taboo and stigmatized topic. People don't necessarily want to talk about going through menopause and you have a dry vagina, or, you'd rather sit in the corner and braid your pubic hairs than you would put out for your husband or partner, or you're very quick to snap at your children, or you are changing physically and you are very vain and that is impacting your self-confidence, or you are setting boundaries and it is disrupting your relationships, or you are doing the work to really figure out you and this awakening that you're having as a middle-aged woman, and it's causing conflict in your life. So there's so much crossover of mental health and doing the work that you're suggesting and aging as a middle-aged woman and experiencing some or all of the things that we all are going to go through at some point in our lives. So I appreciate you so much, Amy. You've been life-changing for me. You've been life-changing for certainly Shane and I's marriage. You have helped a number of my friends and people who I care about deeply. I want to help elevate what you're doing in these boot camps, in these very quick and efficient sessions. How does someone who's listening to this and something that you've said has really resonated with them, how does someone learn more about you, your approach, your webinars, your boot camp? Tell us.
They can go to my website. It's justamy.org.
Yeah, I mean, you are a unicorn. Like, you spend 10 minutes with someone and you're like, boom, nailed it. I mean, I'm a pretty complicated person. And you nailed me in, I think, less than 30 minutes. And I was like, holy shit, this woman knows what she's talking about. And you weren't afraid to call me out on my bullshit, which I appreciated and have grown to love and respect you, as difficult as it was to hear sometimes.
I'm also very compassionate and know when to zing somebody and know when not to zing somebody. I don't know. It could have gone a lot of directions, you and I.
Yeah, you and I could have duked it out a couple of times for sure. That would be like, if I were a betting man, I'm not sure who I'd put my money on. Amy, something that's been so powerful in my experience, and I know is really a fundamental in these boot camps and sessions that you're doing with your clients, is the victim cycle and the accountability cycle. And there's an element of visuals here that I would love for you to share with people, because it is so powerful in once you recognize both of those cycles.
You have beliefs and needs. This is really important. This is when they're met, you feel safe. When you're triggered, it is your unresolved issue. Always. You cannot get triggered unless it's something that's brewing for you. It's your stuff. I'm okay. I get triggered. I go into a story. It's a default story. And it's ultimately a victim story. So when you're triggered, you feel like somebody is doing something to you. So it's happening to me, which then makes it a victim story. You're doing this to me. And now I'm in this story that I have rehearsed and I know it, and it just runs. You don't even consciously always know it's running, but it's running. It just goes right to that story. And now I have justification to be an entitled brat and have a temper tantrum. Temper tantrums are passive or aggressive. And they're very sophisticated ways that we learned how to avoid or not deal with conflict. They're very manipulative ways to actually deal with what's going on. And so we learned them young. or from those characters, but you can go into like shutting down, and people shut down a lot of ways. Smoking pot, getting depressed, blocking people, their social media shutting down. That's sort of a really passive fuck you. um, like ways people should silent treatment in relationships, freezing, walking out of rooms, making yourself invisible. Like those are more passive ways that people would have a temper tantrum. In all fairness, they're actually trauma responses, but the word temper tantrum tends to get you out of your shit. Like you are acting out and you need to stop acting out and process it. So there's passive temper tantrums, there's aggressive temper tantrums. Those can be like real, like yelling, screaming. It could be an addiction problem. Actually, there could be a million addiction problems up here because a marijuana problem looks more like this. A heroin problem looks more like that. Like you can have a shopping problem. You can go overspend. You can do more, start 5 more businesses. Like their reactions to those characters. Like a perfectionist will go get a better A plus, be better at what they're doing, add more to their plate, and then they have a hangover from doing that because you emotionally have to recover or physically have to recover, or you're sitting in a lot of resentment because you're doing those things. You're on overload. There is no self-care. So there's a big hangover here. This is when people go to therapy. This is when people leave. They cancel their appointment. So when you're in your hangover, it's the best time. It's when people reach out. Like when their marriage is in crisis, they reach out. When they kiss and make up, they cancel the appointment. So we're really stuck in this cycle, and we go to therapy generally to talk about all this stuff up here, all these behaviors. I think it's important to understand what's going on. I think it can take time to understand that in therapy. And eventually, my whole thing is you have to understand the belief systems that support your behavior. So this is what you work on. The triggers are your unresolved issues. So that's important in the story you're telling yourself. These are way more important to spend time on figuring out, understanding, than you coming in and telling me what somebody did to you or what your husband did or what your wife did or how you're stuck. So we have 4 emotions: happy, mad, sad, and afraid. When you are stuck in an emotion, it is not going to be beneficial. If you're stuck in sadness, you're stuck in depression. If you're stuck in fear, you're stuck in anxiety. If you're stuck in mad, you're imploding and that's affecting your life. You're in anger all the time. And frankly, if you're stuck in happiness, that's bullshit too. That's not real. It's not healthy. It's not normal. We have to flow in and out of all of our emotions. And when you know how to do that, you're okay. Getting stuck in one of them is not. Yeah. Most families or most people learn that they have permission to do 2 of those. Like Italians are taught they can be happy and pissed. That's it. Maybe we call it passion, right? Or a family may learn that sadness and depression is okay, but nothing else is okay. Another family may be a culture of just happy, and you don't have to have trauma, but if you grow up in a house that's only happy, you actually aren't allowed to be mad. So that causes problems in, now I have to just make sure everybody's happy. Well, you can't make sure everybody's happy. It doesn't work like that. People have more emotions than that one happy thing. So you don't have to have a lot of abuse or dramatic things or childhood trauma. Your family dynamic downloaded what it downloaded, and some of it is in your way.
Yeah. So once you recognize this victim cycle, which you do a fantastic job of really breaking this down for individuals or couples or whatever it may be, you then switch over and you teach the accountability cycle, which is separate.
Well, that's week 4. And you need to know this first, because if you jump over this and you just do the accountability thing, you're going to skip over all your own accountability. You can't get there unless you understand this first.
What Amy does throughout these boot camps and webinars and 6 weeks, 6 week. Ugh. So what Amy does through these webinars and through her program that is so very effective is she identifies this victim cycle for you. She teaches you to go through this process and really dig deep to understand where your victim cycle is. Once you recognize the victim cycle, not only of yourself, but perhaps of your spouse or someone else or your children or your parent or your friendships, it is literally life changing in what you teach in this program. I am so very thankful. You've made a profound difference in my life. You've made a profound difference in my husband's life and certainly many friends whom I've sent to you. I would highly, highly encourage each and every one of you to check out Amy Chandler. Tell me your website again.
Justamy.org.
Justamy.org. She has a Facebook. She has a very powerful video on justamy.org that literally sums you up in 2 minutes. And feel free to reach out to me if you need any introduction. Amy is located here in Denver, but can do virtual sessions. So caters to people all over the United States and frankly, all over the world. I am thankful for you, my beautiful friend. And thanks for taking the time out of your busy day today to join us and talk about how your fundamentals and foundation can apply to really women in middle-age health as well. So don't forget, subscribe, follow us on hotflashhealth.com, listen to us on YouTube or anywhere that you get your podcasts. And I appreciate you. Mwah. Thank you, Amy, and thank you.